never really wanted to be a principal. There is no big bucks. You're not going to get rich being a school teacher. You had shaped his life for him to be the person that he is today. I don't think I impacted their lives more than they impacted mine. He said, I love you, but you cannot come to his funeral. Because if you don't teach your children the values that you want them to have, someone else will. And they may not be in line with yours.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cold Start Media. As always, I'm your host, Fallon Evans. And today I've got the pleasure of speaking with a very prolific member of the North Louisiana community and a relatively locally famous educator. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Ethel Howell, a 45-year veteran of the Wynn Parish School Board. I've lived in Winfield the majority of my life, except for leaving to go to Grambling State University to get my Bachelor of Science degree. Other than that, I'm a Winfieldian and have been here all my life.
Of those 45 years, could you break down what you were doing for?
For the first 15, in 1972, I was hired at the Atlanta High School pre-K through 12 school, and I taught Title I reading for maybe 7 of those years, and then 8 of those years I was 4th grade self-contained, where I taught all subjects from English to the sciences, math and science. Then I left there and went to the Winfield Middle School because my oldest son wanted to play football. We had basketball only because we were a Class C school, so he came to a AA school in order to play football, and it was easier for me to get him to and from practice if I moved into town. So I stayed at the middle school 7 or 8 years, I'm not sure, as a 6th grade reading and English teacher, occasionally social studies added to the curriculum. Then 1998, 99, I went back to Atlanta as assistant principal. Then 99, 2000, I became principal of the Winfield Kindergarten School for 17 years.
Quite the resume.
I guess. I am certified as supervisor of education, principal, elementary, secondary, and I am a certified reading specialist. And I'm the one who do not read directions until I have to. So I don't know if that's a good reading specialist or not. I can teach people to read, but I don't follow.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll start from the beginning. So could you tell us about your time in Atlanta as a teacher and memorable moments that you have from there?
Oh gosh, Atlanta will always have a special place in my heart, maybe because it was my very first teaching career, even doing student teaching. But Atlanta was my beginning of my profession. So that Atlanta High School will always have a special place in my heart. When I was hired as the Title I reading teacher for kindergarten through 8th grade. So there were a lot of diversity in the education of those students who had problems reading, and at varying levels. Some were dyslexic, some were slow learners, and some were just uninterested learners. So we had to develop them. So within that time that I helped to teach them how to read, and the love of reading was paramount in my mind. And some of those kids, there's one little girl who came to school and we learned ABC the entire time that she was in there. And they would let me keep her longer. We learned ABC, and when she left that classroom, she knew ABC. She went home and went to sleep. She had never heard of ABC the next day that she came back.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge to me because I couldn't figure out. We learned it. What happened to it?
Yeah.
But we didn't retain it. So by the time she left me at the end of that year, she knew all 26 of her alphabets, and I could flash with whatever one. And it was because I started tagging her with the letter every day to go home with that letter.
Yeah.
So
And so when dealing with kids like that, what did you find most effective, and what would you advise parents on doing?
you can't get upset, and you cannot become defeated because whatever you taught them at that particular day didn't work. So you have to find avenues, and then you start, as you teach the child, you start learning the child. So then you start putting yourself in that child's position to figure out what is it that I need to do to help that child accomplish a goal.
Yeah.
So you reward them, you teach them, you reward them. You cannot get upset and get them frustrated, because if you do that, no learning is taking place, none, because then they fear you and they don't want to do anything for you. But if you can get them to feel like they are pleasing you and they're helping you, if they learn whatever it is you're trying to teach them, then they work harder. And that's just from the Dictionary of Ethel.
Gotcha. Well, a subject I'm really excited to touch on is your time as a principal, because spending the time around you, it's by far what I've heard most people talk about. And not a single person has had anything negative to say. They always bring up the disciplinary actions that you had to take, but it's always followed by, well, I deserved it. So could you tell us how you ended up becoming a principal, and maybe some of the initial challenges?
I never really wanted to be a principal. I wanted to be a supervisor because I thought I could help the adults more than I could the students, because I wanted the adults to know how to interact and get the best from the students that they taught. So that was not my goal. I decided to become a supervisor. So my certification as a supervisor of education was the first certification that I got. So then, as I applied for those jobs, I did not get those jobs. They had other people who had more experience and who had come through the ranks of becoming the teacher, a curriculum coordinator, and then an assistant principal to a supervisor. Well, I only had classroom teachers, so I had to look into, well, maybe you need to become a principal first in order to get to be a supervisor. So that's why I decided to go into being a principal. All right, the job came open. There were two positions that came open for principalship. And of course, back at that time, you had to take the National Teachers Exam, the NTE, which was a booger of an exam. To use the word booger, I mean, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I had to take the NTE from graduating from college in order to become a teacher, because we had those scores as one of the things for reference in becoming a classroom teacher. So I needed, with the supervisor certification, I needed 12 hours to become a principal. So I went to college that year at the University of Northwestern, and had to get special permission for the summer classes to take 12 hours. So I did that, got special permission. And getting the special permission, found out a week prior to testing that I had to take the NTE in order to be certified to become a principal.
Oh,
Taking
wow.
12 hours in the summer and taking the NTE. Well, it was late in the day. There were no study guides left that I could use to guide me into that exam. Nothing. And then there was another lady that went with us. We drove carpool together to go to school. Nothing over there helped us, either one of us. We were both going to apply for those two jobs. And I decided I am not going to make this, because that NTE is terrible. Got in the NTE, the lady who was riding with me couldn't remember her name to write it on the application.
Yeah.
So I had to, she said, "What's my name?" And I thought, this is not going well. Neither one of us are going to pass. So she couldn't remember her name. I couldn't remember the content. But we took the test, and you could pay to find out if you had passed the test. She paid and found out she passed. I refused to pay. They were going to have to just mail it to me, and I was going to be surprised.
Yeah.
The mail came. I wouldn't touch the envelope. I had my husband to read the results because I would read it, and then I passed.
Wow.
And passed pretty big score.
Fairly well, huh?
Fairly well. Have no idea. Had to been a supreme being guiding my hand. I don't know because I passed it. So the application process started. I applied for the job, and they interviewed me because they wanted to know which one of the jobs did I want. There was an assistant principal, and then there was a principal's job. So I thought the other lady would have been better as the principal, and I would take the assistant principal's job. So I got the job as assistant principal, and going back to Atlanta after several years of leaving Atlanta and going back as assistant principal with another female principal there. When I went back, it was just like going back home to that because I knew everybody knew me, and whatever I needed, they catered more to me than the principal. So I had a real heavy challenge because that particular principal took me as a threat.
Gotcha.
And it was hard for us to work together as a unit and one in accord, you know. So it was the biggest challenge was to be able to do my job as an assistant principal and to help her as the principal because she didn't allow it. She thought I was a threat to her. So then the principalship came open for the Winfield Kindergarten School, and I decided to apply for that because I had done the assistant principal. So then when I went to the Winfield Kindergarten School as the principal, I had a major challenge there because we had two different forms of styles. I can't remember what do you call that?
Two different styles of leadership.
Two different styles of leadership. She was an authoritative, and I was not. I am not that authoritative. And my teachers, most of them were seasoned teachers and had been under this authoritative leadership and could not adjust to my way of leading. So we the first year was a huge challenge for me with my staff, and that also it filtered into them teaching the students because they had a perceived idea of what I should be doing and what I was not doing, and that they did not have the leadership that they needed. And I had to show them that we were going to share this leadership. We were going to share it for the benefit of those students. And they even at one time called the supervisor in and met with the supervisor after hours. And I had no knowledge of that until the supervisor felt real guilty and called me in to let me know that that had happened. So I had to figure out, instead of being reactive to them going behind my back to talk to the supervisor above my head, because that was the next step to talk to the superintendent. So I had to be could not be reactive. I had to be proactive and to figure out how to gain the confidence and the shared leadership with my staff. That was hard.
Yeah.
Hard to do.
Well, uh, before we get too far into that, how would you advise people? Because I mean, principal. I know we didn't speak about it, but the last 17 years of your career was principal. So
Mhm.
it seems you never made it to the supervisor portion.
I didn't
Uh,
want to go anymore.
yeah, you just stopped where you were. You loved it, huh?
Yeah, 3 or 4 positions came open and I never applied.
Yeah. Well, like I said, before we get into that, how would you advise uh, aspiring teachers or people who are already in the educational field that are trying to advance? What advice would you have for them?
First thing, they've got to figure out what it is they want. And if they're going in it for the money, if they're going in it for the title, then they may need to look at it before they venture into it. Because when you go into those positions, you're going to be disappointed if you have a different goal than what the position allows you to have.
Right.
So you're going to have to map it out in your head and research it really good. Then the next thing, if you are able to get one of those jobs, then you're going to have to immerse yourself into that position and learn it and know the people that you are serving. Because once you get into a position, it is not just a position and it's not just a title, because you're serving others in a different capacity than a medical profession or a construction person. In the school system, there is no big bucks. You're not going to get rich being a school teacher or even a supervisor or a principal. You're not getting rich. You will live comfortably, but you're not going to be rich. You have to aspire to that. Then there are parents you deal with. And a lot of times I've learned that the parents that you deal with, here's the catcher. If it is a first child raised by 2 parents and an only child, you've got a problem. If a grandparent is raising a grandchild, you've got a problem. If it's a middle child, you're home free.
Yeah.
And then if it's a baby of the family, you've got a bigger problem. So you have to look at all of those little aspects as you're dealing with these people and these parents of these children, because their minds. We had one lady who got so upset with us because we didn't cut up the child's grapes. We were trying to kill her child because we didn't cut up that child's grapes at lunch.
She thought the child couldn't swallow the grapes whole or couldn't chew them on
The
their own.
child was accidentally swallow those whole grapes and we didn't cut them up. So what did I do? I cut them up. Had the lunchroom ladies to cut them up for her. And the child got upset because the mother wanted her grapes cut up and the other children were eating the whole grapes.
Yeah.
So then we had to deal with the child, see what the child wanted. So mama thought we were still cutting up the grapes, and the child knew that we was giving her whole grapes. She was happy. Mama thought she was happy.
Hey, that might be incriminating. You might want to watch out saying that on camera.
Then we had a child who would not eat the cafeteria food. They only wanted a Happy Meal.
Wow.
So mama didn't know what to do. And I told mama that she couldn't bring that child a Happy Meal when all the other kids were eating school lunches, because that child, the other children would want what that child had.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out what to do. I went and bought a Happy Meal box, and I put that child's lunch in the Happy Meal box. Mama was happy, child was happy, because
Yeah.
child thought he had a Happy Meal from McDonald's every day.
What kept you in that role for so much longer than you anticipated being it?
Those little bitty people. I have a love for little people, and I know you have a little person, and they come up with things that you would ever think of. They're so little, and yet so wise in a lot of ways that they actually teach you things that you never would think of teaching or think about. Now, we would, they would have to pass my office to go to other classrooms or go to the gym. Teachers would be leading them. We had one little girl, they have a leader and a caboose. One little girl started crying because she was the leader, and she kept looking back, and she just cried. And the teacher couldn't figure out, so she stopped her at my office. The child wouldn't tell the teacher what was wrong. And so she stopped. She said, "Miss Howell, can you ask this child what is wrong with her?" And I stopped and I asked her, I said, what is it? Can you tell me? Put her in my lap, and she sat there and she said, "They're following me." And I said, "They're following you?" "They're following me, and I don't like them following me." So I had to tell the teacher she'll be a great caboose. She couldn't be a leader.
Yeah.
So it's the little people that kept me at the kindergarten. I love Atlanta. I love Winfield Middle School. But those little people at the kindergarten school kept me there so that if I became a supervisor, I wouldn't have that interaction with those little people.
Yeah. I remember in a conversation prior, it sounded like the little people loved you just as much.
Yeah.
You told me a story about anytime the children would pass your office, they would save their trash just so they could put it in your trash can to come visit you.
Or if they saw me coming down the hall, they would untie their shoes so that I could hit my leg, and they would put their foot on my leg so I could tie their shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's little people.
Yeah. You want to tell everybody the story you told me
About the little boy?
There's that one, and then there was you told me a story about oh, you said that the worst punishment for the teacher was the best punishment for the kids. About them having the nap in your office.
Oh, the teacher thought that the worst punishment for this child was to send them when they could not take their. We took naps. They had so many minutes a day for kindergarten to take a nap, so many minutes per day for the pre-K to take a nap. So about sixth period, well, most people know in the other grades the sixth period was the sixth class period. So about sixth period during the day, that was nap time for pre-K and K. So some of them would be restless. They couldn't take naps in their classroom, or they would bother the other kids to do whatever. So in order for the class to settle down, the teacher would send the children to my office to sleep in my office. Well, it was a reward for the kids to come to my office. It was a reward for the teacher to get rid of the child.
Yeah.
So it was a win-win. So when they had one little boy that come in, and he's supposed to, they have to come in and be quiet. And that's what they would come in, put their mats down, would not say a word to me. I would be in my office, they'd come in with their mats, and they just lie them down on the floor, and then they'd get on the mat. And they'd look around, I would just say, "Hey, Miss Howell." I'd say, "Hi," whoever it was. And I said, "It's nap time, you must go to sleep." So one little boy, supposed to be asleep, looked over and said, "Miss Howell, I have my pictures on my bookcase. That's your man?" I said, "What? Is that your man right there?" I said, "Yes." "That ain't right." I said, "What's wrong with it? That's not right. What's wrong with it?" "You black, he white." "That ain't right." It's funny. I mean, little people.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but your school was one of the only schools or the last schools to still have paddling as a disciplinary action. You want to touch on that, and then later on we'll get into some of the stories.
Well, we have what we have corporal punishment, and at registration, parents had a form to fill out whether or not they agreed to or did not agree to their child having corporal punishment, which would mean they could get it as high as 3 licks, 1 to 3 licks if they did not follow the rules or real discipline problems. Now, the teachers could not send them to the office unless they had tried out every avenue to redirect that child in his behavior. But and then some of them would get so frustrated they would automatically send them to the office. Some of them I had to go and get them, and one I statute of limitations I sure hope's over because he refused to walk to the office to go to sleep in my office. And I said, well, the only way I know to get you is to pull you. He said, okay, I'm going to sit down. He sat down on his mat. He put his hand out. I grabbed his little hand and I pulled him all the way to the stairs. He got up. He walked up the stairs, sat back down, and I pulled him on to the office. If somebody had seen that on camera, I'd be in jail. But it was an agreement between the two of us.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to get a spanking when he got there. So, but anyway, whenever the kids got to the point where they had to have a spanking, I had to call the parent. I didn't have to call the parent because they had signed a little permission slip for me to use corporal punishment. And all I had to do was fill out a form and send it home, because when children go home and tell, they go home and they tell their version of what happened.
Right.
We were testing one time, and one child got out of her desk and on her knees digging in the desk, and I passed by, I had the test manual in my hand, and I tapped her on the head and I said, get back in your seat so you can listen to directions to take the test. She went home and told her mother I had hit her on the head with a book. It was a little book. It was a little thin test manual. Mama came to school mad as all get out because I had hit her child on the head with a book. In her mind, she perceived an encyclopedia. You know how big those books are.
Yeah.
So I had the child, I couldn't explain it to her, so I said, honey, go get the book that I hit you on the head with. And she went and got the test manual, and she gave it to her. This is it. And Mama said, that's it. So so you sent the note home to the parent, whatever happened. But before I ever administer any type of corporal punishment, I called the parent and gave the parent the infraction, told the parent what had happened. Parent talked to the child. She asked the child what had happened. And I always knew which parent to call. If I said, well, I'm going to call your mama, and they sat back and smiled, I called Daddy.
Yeah.
If they sat back and smiled, if I was going to call Dad, and they smiled, I called him Mama. So you always knew by the actions of the child which parent to call. So I would call whichever one to call.
That incited a little bit of fear in the child.
Yes.
You were also telling me that you've been teaching for so long that whenever you would call the parents, what would the parents tell you?
What did you do to me? I didn't die from it. Do what you got to do.
Yeah. So
they will be all right. That's what they would say.
Yeah. So I guess it worked out.
But I would always put them, little people, you would put them across your lap, and I would always put my one hand on their back, and because all I wanted was a back part. I didn't need the back or anything like that. I would lay them across my lap, and they would turn their heads and look at me, and I would give them their 3 licks. Now, if they were bigger, they couldn't go across my lap.
Right.
But afterwards, I would set them up in my lap, and they would look at me, and I would talk to them. I would wipe their face if they cried, and we would talk about it. Prior to the patterning, we would talk. Why are you doing this? What happened? Why are we having to get to this point? Then afterwards, we would talk, and I would say, I hope that we don't ever do this again, and you can come to my treasure chest and get something out and not have to get the pattern and then get something from the treasure chest. So they got a hug and the treasure chest, and they bounced back to class. I said, wipe your eyes. You don't want anybody to see that you've been crying. So they wipe their little eyes and they take off.
Yeah. What was the most interesting situation that you've ever had to apply disciplinary action to?
One, the three that came into the classroom because they were fighting the
Yeah,
office.
the story you told me prior. Go ahead and tell everybody for.
These three kids were sent from the playground to the office. Two girls and one boy. They got in the office. The little boy was sitting in the middle. One girl's on the other side. And I said, all right, why were you all fighting out on the playground? No one said anything. Finally, the little boy leaned back in his chair, put his hand on his face, and he said, they were fighting over me. And I said, oh, really? They were fighting over you? He said, yes, ma'am. And I looked at them, and they both nodded. And I said, so why were they fighting over you? This is early September. We went to school in August. He said, well, you know, a long, long time ago when school first started, she was my girlfriend. And I quit her and I got her for my girlfriend. I said, okay, so why did you quit her? Well, she was trying to change me. And I didn't want her to change me. And I got this other girl, and we get along fine. She doesn't change me. I said, oh, she doesn't. No, she does not change me. So why are they fighting? Well, they don't. She didn't like her anymore because she was my girlfriend. So they started fighting. I said, okay. Then I had to call the parents because what I had to do to one, I had to do it to all three. One mother said, am I supposed to laugh or am I to cry? It's your choice. She said, so what are you doing? I said, I'm listening to those kids. She said, why aren't you laughing? I said, because they're looking right at me. I said, my secretary has closed her door because her head is on her desk. And she said, okay, well, why don't we just give her 3 licks? I said, whatever your choice is. So what we do for this one, we'll do for the other two. So I called the other two parents, and they basically said the same thing. And the little boy was totally shocked that he got us paddling because these two girls were fighting over him.
Yeah, and he was just proud as all get out.
He was proud. They were 5 years old.
Another thing you were telling me, actually, you were telling me today as well, that every time the sheriff sees you, he talks about how he got paddlings from you, but then he talks about how great it was and how much he loved you for it.
Yeah.
So you want you want to tell us some of those stories too? Like I said, you were just telling me right before we started rolling the cameras that you had went to a meeting today, and the sheriff and a
He's
couple other
the
people.
incoming sheriff that he will take over the office on July 1. And he was speaking to the Kiwanis Club that I'm a member of. And he said, when he got up, he said, I want you to know that when I was in 6th grade, that woman right there was the sheriff. She didn't take any stuff off of anybody. She just paddled your butt. And everybody was corrected. So if anybody who has not gone through that woman right there needs to have had the opportunity, and they would be right, just like me.
And then there was another one that you had said, somebody said something about.
Oh, I just came back from the dentist, and he was at the meeting. And he said, do you understand what the sheriff said about you today? And I said, no. He said, well, this is what he told me, that you had shaped his life for him to be the person that he is today. And he several people have told me that. I went in the restaurant to get your lunches today, and 2 ladies were there, and they were hugging and telling me I how much they loved me because of what I did. And one of the ladies said I was her son's teacher and counselor. Had I not been in 6th grade, had I not been there at the middle school for him at that time, he would not have made it because she had lost all hope.
Gotcha.
But I don't take any credit for any of that. I just love the kids. Most of my parents knew that I would love their child any way necessary. If it was a hug, a Band-Aid, I spent a fortune with Band-Aids because we were pre-K and K. We had sales tax money to buy school supplies. I bought underwear because we had accidents. The youth shop donated uniforms to our school. So child soiled their clothes, parents didn't put a change of clothing. I had a change of clothing for those kids to take them home. So I love those children any way necessary.
Well, it's got to be absolutely an amazing feeling to know that you've impacted everybody so much and so many people to where, I mean, following you around, you can't even go into Walmart and make it out in 5 minutes. You
No,
go into Walmart to grab something quick, and
no.
everybody in Walmart wants to talk to you.
Give me a hug. COVID stopped us from hugging, so we just stand and talk. I didn't, I don't think I impacted their lives more than they impacted mine because the support, the love that I gave to them, they gave me that twofold. Because most of them, like I said, when if they had their older child, within 17 years, I probably taught the entire family. And in teaching the entire family, the parents and I became very good friends. And the children knew that if they had to come to my office, I was not disciplining them from anger. They were being disciplined for love, from love. And that is one thing I wanted them to understand. And that is also one of the things I wanted the teachers to know. In order to discipline a child, you have to know the child. You cannot go on what someone else said. Those little cards that they used to write from teacher to teacher, I hated those things because if those teachers read those cards, that was that teacher's perception of that child. That other teacher hadn't gotten to know that child, maybe a totally different perception. So you had preconceived knowledge if you read that information. You had to learn that child yourself. And if you didn't know the child, how can you teach the child? And you had to be open so the child would know you in order to receive that knowledge from you. That is the way I taught. I learned every one of my students. I may not recognize their faces, but once they tell me their names, I can go through each one of them and remember something about that child.
Yeah.
Because I remember, I have a long story to tell you about one child that is no longer here with me, but that child will have a special place in my heart. Um, they came here from New Orleans, and they were living in the woods in a tent. The daddy was helping to plow some cotton fields over around Natchitoches, and that's how they lived. And the students came and told me that little boy was fourth grade. I was at Atlanta, and I told him that he needed to come to school. Daddy brought him to school and enrolled him in my classroom, but he never came to the office. Parent-teacher conference day, he wanted to come see me because the little boy was bringing a sack lunch, and he wanted to eat in the cafeteria, and he would come and tell me, I want to eat in the cafeteria, so I paid for his lunch to eat in the cafeteria. He was wearing, we call them brogans, they're like work shoes. He was wearing those to school, and he wanted some tennis shoes. And he told me he would come and he would put his head in the middle of my back, and he would say, I was Miss Evans, and he said, Miss Evans, I saw some tennis shoes at Walmart. They cost $9 and something, and I want a pair of tennis shoes. I went to Walmart that evening, bought him those tennis shoes, and he would put a quarter, a nickel, a dime on my desk every day. And what I did, none of the other kids knew I had done that because I would put them in his desk. When he got to school, he would go and change the shoes and put his other shoes and put them in his book bag. Parent-teacher conference day, his daddy came, told him in the office drove a motorcycle, had the ponytail, and this is back in the 70s and early 80s. Wore a ponytail, sleeves up like Elvis Presley on Grease,
Yeah.
sleeves up, tattoos, little town like Atlanta. Hadn't seen any of that. So he came there and told him he wanted to see Ethel Evans. And they said, okay. So they directed him to my classroom, and the principal went and got several other men just in case, because he had on his biker boots, the whole 9 yards.
They didn't know what to expect.
They didn't know what to expect. So they started walking. He came over and he walked in the classroom and he said, I need to see Ethel Evans. I said, I'm she. He said, you're Ethel Evans? I said, yes, I am. He said, you're black. I said, been that way all my life. I don't know how to be any ways different. I said, how can I help you? And he told me, I am the child's father. And I said, well, so happy to meet you. He said, so why are you doing these things for my child? And I said, child is the operative word. Your child, I don't know you, but he needed me, and I did for him, hoping that if some of my boys needed me, someone would do the same. And he said, okay. So I told him the child needed summer school, fine. That summer, that child tried to save two other little kids in the river over in Natchitoches, the red, whatever that Red River, I think, and he drowned. He saved them, and he drowned. The dad sent word for me. He said, I love you, but you cannot come to his funeral. So I did not go to his funeral. I was on my way to school in Natchitoches, and I saw him plowing on the road there. I pulled my vehicle over on the road, got out. He saw me, got off of his tractor. We embraced. He went back down on his tractor. I got back in my vehicle. I've never seen him since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now that's the long story.
Do you know how old that child was?
He was 10 years old.
10 years old when he passed.
And if they got into kids get into a fight on the playground, he got into a fight. He didn't fight as a child. He fought as a grown person to hurt. So, but if I was out on the playground, he would not fight them. He would come and put his head right under my shoulder blades and his back. And he said, I'm upset. And I said, so what do you need to do? He said, I need to stand here with you and I'll be all right.
Wow. Well, trying to move away from more emotional subject. During your time as a principal, what did you do to help foster a relationship? I know we touched on it a little bit prior, but what did you do to help foster a relationship between the school system, the child, and the parent? Because like you said earlier, some parents can be a little bit more difficult than others. So, how would you navigate that and try to make the parents understand that you cared about their child just as much as they did?
Well, one of the things we did, I had an open door policy. And when they would come to school, before, I think we all had cell phones at that time. I put my cell phone number on the board, because I had a chalkboard when we had the opening day of school. I put my home phone number and my cell phone number on that board that they could call me at any time. So my teachers learned that I did that for them at that time. They did it in the classroom as well. And the one thing that I had my teachers to know, they needed to know those kids and understand who they were. In a lot of instances, you see a child and a parent and you formulate an opinion of them just by first meeting. And I always made sure that my teachers knew that that child, just like their children, when that baby was born, that was the most beautiful baby. I don't care how ugly that baby was when it came here.
There's no ugly babies. You're going to get in trouble.
There are no ugly babies, because to you, what you perceive that child to be, to that parent, that mother, that child was the most beautiful thing that ever existed on this earth. So you had to look at that child like those parents, like you looked at your child. So that was one thing. Then they had to know the child, get to know the parents, so that they would be able to talk to each other. And they were also, the teachers were also to send home progress reports on a weekly basis to let them know how well their children were doing within that grading period. And at the end of each, I never, I had a stamp, but I signed every progress report. And when I first started, I had over 200, 300 kids. I signed every progress report and every report card. So, and if those children didn't make the grade, the teachers had to explain to me what had happened. Parents realized that, and they knew that they could come to me if they had a problem. They could call me, and I was going to research and find out, even if they had to come to the office. Now, the one thing that I did when a parent came in who was upset, I set the teacher by the door and the parent on the inside, so that if it got really, really irate in there, I would dismiss the teacher and just the parent and I would talk. Would not put the teacher in harm's way.
Right.
So the teachers knew I supported them, but they also knew that if I found that they were wrong in their actions, then they had to see me
Right.
and explain to me. But I supported them when that parent was there. I also supported the parent. Then when we had different little organizations, we had parties for almost everything that they could think of to have a party. So the parents were in and out of the classroom. If a parent felt the need to want to come to the classroom and visit with the teacher at any time, we had paraprofessionals in the classroom. The parent would take over the classroom. The teacher would talk to the parent. And if we had a PTO organization where the parents would come to the classroom and work in the classroom within their child's classroom. Sometimes I had to move that parent out of the classroom to work in another classroom because the child couldn't handle mama being in the classroom with them. So we did things like that. Uh, we had book fairs. Parents could come and shop with the child. We had little field trips. Parents could go with their children on the field trips. So we tried to involve the parents in the school as much as we could. We Here in Winfield we have the hog dog trials where we have the hogs and the dogs. So every place of business would get a ceramic hog and decorate this pig. Parents decorated the pigs for us. And we won several years. The whole community was upset with us.
So they would decorate this giant pig statue for out in front of the school.
Yes,
Okay.
they would decorate the pig, and the parents did it. And they couldn't, people couldn't handle that. They had to rent the pig. I never rented the pig. The prison rented the pig for me because they were our partners in that school. The warden was totally fascinated with me because I could walk in the auditorium when we had good citizens, terrific kids, and superstar. Parents would come for those awards given to those kids, and I would walk in the auditorium, let everybody get inside, and then I'd come out of my office and walk in, stand up in front and raise 1, 2, 3, total silence. When the warden got up to speak to tell us what his next project was, they redid the whole playground for us and all that, so we were very familiar with this warden. And he said, "It amazes me that this one little lady can walk in front of over 300 people, raise 3 fingers, and the whole bit gets quiet." And one of the people from the audience said, "You know why?" And he said, "How many of you did she teach?" Most of the audience raised their hands. He said, "That's because we know her."
Nobody wanted them spankings. You start handing them out on stage, huh?
I had one parent who came to check on his child, And I said, okay, well, we can go down to the classroom. Halfway down the hall, he said, wait a minute. I'm having flashbacks. I got to rest a minute. And I told him he ought to be ashamed.
What is one of the most rewarding memories that you have? Like maybe a specific situation that you were just like, I couldn't be more grateful that this is what I've chose to be.
Oh, gosh, there were so many of them. Um, one, when I retired, the number of people that came through that day, they gave me a um, party get together for people to come in and wish me Godspeed for in my retirement. And there were so many people who came and told stories that I didn't remember. Half of them I did. They interviewed the kids, and most of the things that, what can you remember most about Mrs. Howell? She paddled. We had to go to the office, we paddled. But what else did you go to the office for? Her treasure chest. Because if they did well in the classroom, they went to the treasure chest. If they did not do well in the classroom and they had to come to me for disciplinary, they got disciplined and then they went to the treasure chest. So the treasure chest in my office. And then they said, well, she paddled you? Yeah. So what is the best thing that you know about Mrs. Howell? She gave us hugs. So there was a balance there.
Yeah.
And a lot of those students, a student that I had in 6th grade is now we're building a 3-story in our small town, a 3-story community health center. Um, she is the contractor for that center. I have people who are lawyers. I have a well-known cancer doctor, or on, oncologist. That's it, an oncologist that's well known. That if you go to him, he will do his very best to save lives. I taught him, taught his sister. She's a doctor as well, medical doctor. I had one this past summer. I had to have an X-ray, and he came and got me, carried me into the room to X-ray. I got up on the table, and he said, "I now know who you are." And I said, "You do?" I didn't know which way to go with that.
Yeah.
What did he know? He said, "You taught me the best thing in 6th grade, best teacher I've ever had." And I said, "Well, thank you." And I said, "So what's your name?" And he told me his name. And I said, "And your brother was a twin. You have a twin brother." He said, "You taught both of us. And best year we've ever had." All that, those are my accomplishments. When it comes back and it's not somebody who hates you because of what you did. And I read stories to them, and those stories are being read by those parents to their children.
Gotcha. And so, in a similar vein, uh, you were also telling me, we're gonna pick on the sheriff again. You told me that you saw him not too long ago. And the first thing he had something to say
About my
was, yeah,
paddling?
was about your paddling.
And he said, "You paddle me every day." I said, "I did not paddle you every day." He said, I think you did, and I needed him. I know I needed him. I said, "Well, do you ever remember me hugging you?" And he said, "Yes, but that hug was not as effective as that paddle."
And then another thing that we haven't mentioned, but you just brought it up, you're retired now.
Yes.
We haven't told everybody that you're retired. How long have you been retired for?
7 years.
And what's happened since you retired as far as the school system goes?
Well, 2 years after I retired, my staff was upset with me because my husband wanted me to retire. I was not ready to retire. He told everybody in the town that I was retiring, and they would tell me, and I would tell them, no, I'm not retiring. But and they said, your husband said you're retiring, but I'm not retiring. So I had to think about it and decide whether that was the best thing for me to do. And in the end, it wound up being the best thing. I retired in 2017. He died in 2021. So we had those years there. But meanwhile, within that time that I did retire, and I told the superintendent first, and then I came back and had a special faculty meeting to tell my staff that I was retiring. None of them liked the idea of me retiring. 2 years after I retired, they closed kindergarten school down and moved them to the primary school. I couldn't go to Walmart. They were upset with me because they said had I not retired, they never would have closed the school down.
Yeah.
So I still get that, especially from the ladies at church. I was over the women area of the church, and I had 3 of my employees, my staff, who were members of the same church, and I would stand up in front of the church, and tears would start. They would start crying because they didn't like the idea that I retired. So then when they closed the school down, those same people had opportunities to go to other places. Several of them went to Jonesboro, and that principal told them that whoever their principal was prior to her was wrong, and they wanted to know why. She spoiled y'all. Y'all don't know how to act. Y'all can't perform for me because of her.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's not a good thing. I went back as one of the Kiwanians to present the Terrific Kid Award last year, and one of the teachers is at the primary school, still teaching kindergarten, and I presented the awards, and she yelled from the audience to the stage and told me to teach all the other Kiwanians how to present those awards. And I kept, no, let's not do that.
Goodness gracious.
So we had a bond with the teachers. It was hard to get them from the authoritative role to shared leadership.
Yeah.
It was very hard for them to understand that they didn't have to wait for me to tell them what to do. Those decisions they could make. They had as much education as I did. There was no one that I was above unless I had to discipline.
Right.
There was no one that I was beneath. So we worked together as a unit, and I had them to understand that the only way that I look good is through them.
Right.
They were the ones in the classroom doing the hard work and making the nice scores for our school. That made me look good. So if I could keep them doing,
Right. Just like all this great conversation that you're providing for everybody makes me look good. I don't have to do anything.
yeah, you do too.
And then and since you retired, you haven't left the children. You were telling me that you still do a mentor program.
I do. I went to the middle school. They called me because some little girls were having really hard times. They were being suspended in-house and all that. And they thought that they just needed a role model. Me, a role model. But they needed a role model to come and to mentor those little girls. So on Wednesday afternoons, I have 2 classes, the last 2 periods in the afternoon that I deal. Last year there were 12 girls in one class and 13 in the other. This year they were not as large, but I had other girls that I mentored. What I decided to do is to help them to know that, like what they say, what happens in Rome stays in Rome. So what they said in that classroom stayed in there. unless I felt that someone else needed to help. Now, if they talked about committing suicide, which none of them did, then I knew I had to give off that
Right,
information.
right,
Or if they talked about trying to harm another person, then I had to
right.
give that information. But other things that they needed to share, they wanted somebody to validate, to listen, and to redirect them. And that's what I did.
For full transparency for everybody, this is the second time that we've done this, so forgive us if we're, kind of jumping
Digressing.
around. Yeah, we're trying. We remember things that, were really great the first time that we want to try and include this time. Uh, that being said, last time we did this, you said something that I found extremely profound that I think other people would find really useful, and it was that you said if you don't teach your child your values, someone else will.
Yeah.
You want to re elaborate on that?
Well, Christmas, we would have a huge Christmas program. Easter, we would have a huge Easter program. And we all know why we have Christmas and why we have Easter. So at the end of the program, before we dismissed, I took personal privilege and I talked to the parents because our little auditorium was packed with parents and grandparents. So I took personal privilege and because of the to be politically correct, you cannot bring any religion in the school. You cannot name Jesus Christ or Heavenly Father. You cannot say those things. But my thoughts at Christmas and at Easter, if you can teach the child about a man in a red and white suit with a white beard and an Easter bunny, then you can teach your children your values. Because if you don't teach your children the values that you want them to have, someone else will. And they may not be in line with yours. And you've realized that even in the classroom, some of the teachers may not have the same values that you have. But if you have an open line of communication with that teacher, then that teacher can help you and you can help the teacher teach that child. Because why are we in this business? We are in this business for the children. They
Yeah.
are the ones we serve, and we need to be together on our service. So if you don't teach your children their values, the one thing that my mother told us when we got ready to go to college, the 18 years that she had taught us, if we allowed one person, they could tear that down. All 18 years of their values and their teaching could be torn down in one solid minute
By the wrong
by the
person.
wrong person. So our thoughts and our teach your children what you want them to know, what your values are, so that and you teach it strong enough that they don't want to stray away from those things. Whether you believe or not believe, teach them your values.
Yeah, because they're gonna get it from somewhere,
Somebody's going
regardless if you're taking the time to teach them or if they learn it from their peers. They're
yes.
gonna get it from somewhere because we all look up to somebody.
And peer pressure is hectic and it's very strong. And today, since I caused COVID, I give COVID probably too much credit, but COVID destroyed our system and in the education system. The kids don't know how to interact with each other. They don't know how to walk away. They take everything personal, and it is not, and it's all about them. It's not necessarily.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily contribute that directly to the pandemic, but maybe more parenting styles, and without getting too much into the weeds and maybe upsetting too many people. Uh, I believe that maybe a lot of what is going on is today's parents were maybe parented a little bit more strongly than they would like to parent their children. And so taking the good from what they experienced without adding a little bit of the bad as far as the disciplinary side, uh, I think is probably what's adding to
Yeah, they
the
have
children wanting to get their way
the
more
parents.
than
The parents are
used to.
trying to change the way that they were raised. I, I've ex- I've experienced that with my own children. Um, they wanted to raise their children differently, and yet have the same respect that they were brought up with in their parenting styles. And just listening to them talk about what they had to do at various times, and then they thought, "Ooh, Mama did that. I'm being my mama."
Yeah.
And I keep telling them, when you get to that point, there are things that you learn and you grew up with that you try to put into your family, and the discipline you try to do. And I'm sure you will find there are things that will come through you from where your parents raised
Oh,
you.
it happens all the time. It happens all the time. You'll fuss for something. You're like, oh, my dad. Wow. I
Yeah,
have made it to that stage in life. I now understand. So, I mean, that's just a part of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a
it's a
bad
bad
part of
thing.
it. You know, you gotta take the good and the bad, know what you don't want for your children, but also understand that they can't always get their way. They can't always be happy. Sometimes you gotta be tough with them, and
Tough love.
the tough you are, the not the tougher you are. I don't want to say it like that, but the more you instill your values and your disciplines in them early on, I think the easier it is later on.
Well, the more love you have to give.
Oh
and
yeah,
and
that's
and
very
love
true too.
love is not always that passionate, intimate love. There is tough love, there is semi-tough love, and then there's love. So however that love is given, and to help them to be a well-rounded child, to have a well-rounded outlook on life as they grow, there are things that you will have to do to guide them.
Since we're on that topic, you were saying earlier that whenever you would discipline a child, there would be a conversation before and a conversation after, and I really like that. As you mentioned, I have a little one, and that's something that I try to do with her. Is there are steps before we approach whatever disciplinary action needs to happen, whether it's a timeout or corporal punishment, as you guys like to call it. And it's always uh, let known prior to what the consequence is, what's going to happen and what the steps are.
Mm-hmm.
So once we're at that point, there's no uh, ill content from my child towards me,
Mm-hmm.
or in your case, the several children that you had disciplined towards you,
Mm-hmm.
because they knew what was going to happen once they got to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And once they got to that point, it wasn't a, well, what am I in trouble for? It's a, you fully understood why this is happening, what's happening. And after you get the punishment, we're going to talk again. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
upset, but because you're upset, you're going to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you're upset, let's talk about how we're going to fix this in the future.
What
And
are we going to do to make sure that this doesn't have to happen again?
yes, ma'am. And so, all that being said, how would you encourage parents to move forward if that's the direction they wanted to go? How would you uh, encourage parents to help put that in place
It's
to where
communication. You cannot put your child in the room and let the iPad, the video games, and all that
parent them for you?
parent for you. You've got to know where your children are. Talk to them. Find out. Some of them will just sit there and look at you. They're not going to talk to you. But if you continue to talk to them, open up to them, and let them know that you are really interested in them and their activities within that day. And my thing, even with everything that I do, everything that I am a firm believer in open communication. Sometimes it's one-sided. Sometimes it's together. But let that child know that it does not matter what you've done. I'm going to be there for you. But and if you you're wrong in what you've done, you're going to know that too.
I'm gonna let you know
I'm going to
too.
let you
I'm
know
not
too.
biased.
No, whatever you're going to, like I always say, you're going to love them any way necessary. You're going to put your arms around them. You're going to hug them. You're going to discipline them. You may not agree with them on all instances. My kids would come, even my stepchildren, when they were here with me, would say, "What time do we come in?" And I'd give them a time. "Well, we gotta come in." So I drop it 30 minutes lower. They say I said 11:30 would be a good. Why can't it be 12? 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock. 10:30. Okay, we'll go with 11:30. So fine.
Yeah.
Reverse psychology. I'm telling you, I was rough on my kids.
Yeah. I
They
don't
all said
believe
that
it won't be.
they all need psychiatric help because of me.
Well, it comes with it. They comes with it. They all. I'm very familiar with a few of them, and they all seem like all right people.
They're all right.
I don't want to make too many of them's heads too much bigger. They already all got big heads.
Well, I was in the restaurant today. I came out floating because my head's so big.
Yeah, after all the compliments
After all the
at the meeting.
compliments at one meeting and 1 30-minute, 1 hour meeting and all this, all that. But it's my biggest thing with all people and in families, open communication and to show them your love. And even if you have to get on to them, make sure they understand why they're having this situation, the consequences for those, because in a lot of instances, I've seen kids do not hold themselves accountable for anything. But you have to make them understand that, yes, you are accountable for this. There are consequences to your behavior, whether they're good consequences or bad consequences. Reward them, not monetarily all the time, but give them some type of reward if it's nothing more than a hug,
Then an embrace, yeah.
than an embracement. That's all. So in anything, any situation, it's open communication.
For everybody at home, going back to, she said her head was floating. The first time we recorded this, the amount of cars, I wish that the audio was good, because the amount of cars that drove by, honked, yelling and waving, "Hey, Miss Howe, hey, Ethel, how you doing?" It was just, not only was the audio bad, but we barely got any footage because every 5 seconds somebody was driving by saying, "Hey." So I wish I could put together a super cut for you guys, but I mean, we're getting close to time to wrap it up. Is there anything you want to say to anybody? Words of encouragement? There was a motto that you told me that you guys had for the
Oh,
school.
the high school here, their mascot is a tiger. So our little motto that we use, because we were pre-K and K, the beginning. So we were teaching cubs to roar like tigers. Now that is a very profound statement to get to the point that they will be. We were teaching them to become strong adults.
Yeah.
And that was, those kids would yell that. I said, "What are we?" And then they would tell that motto, and it was a proud statement. They are now using that at the primary school.
Wow.
Yeah, they're carrying that on. The superintendent was also one of my employees, the superintendent of schools now. If I walk into, well, Brookshire's and he's there, I get a hug because
Yeah.
he was my one. He was my assistant principal for the pre-K program before he became a principal on up to assistant, the superintendent of schools. Yeah,
Well,
he calls me one of his. I'm one of his mama.
like I said, anything you want to say to anybody? Any thanks? Any
Well,
appreciations? Words of encouragement?
I give thanks to all the people that I've worked with. I was not the boss of anybody because they're the ones who helped me. I have learned more from my students, my employees, my staffs, my coworkers than I ever gave to them. They impacted more my life more than I impacted theirs. Even though I get all these compliments and they are so much appreciated, but I didn't do half of the things that they did for me. So, and my biggest thing is in a profession, you're not well paid as a teacher or as an educator, and the salaries are getting much lower in this profession than it is in the others because we are paid by the number of students that we get on a daily basis. My job as a mentor, they offered to pay me. They can't pay me to do this. It is an honor for me to be able to go back into the schools. It is an honor for me to have the appreciation from others because I didn't do this alone. I had them to help me to be whatever it is I am. And there's a song, I think Gladys Knight says, if anyone should ever write my life story, I would hope that what they had to say about me would be the same thing that they would think of to say about themselves, because their impact on my life was as big to me as my impact on them.
Yeah.
So, and then keep your lines of communication open with your kids. Know where they are, who they're with, and whatever they are doing, and make sure that they know that you will always be there with them and for them, no matter what, because that's what they need. People are saying this world is bad. This world is no better than the people in it. If there's a such word as better.
Yeah.
But this world is not any worse than the people that's in it. And it's up to us to make sure that this next generation will be able to take care of this older generation. So,
All right.
show the love.
Are there? I want to try and bring this up in every podcast right before the end, or every video right before the end. Are there any books that you would recommend to people? I know earlier you said you read stories with your kids. You want to tell people what those were? That way maybe they could.
I read
themselves.
Summer of the Monkeys and Where the Red Fern Grows. And I don't know if the kids chose those books or I did, but those are the two books that I read to both classes, in that to show them the joy of reading. By what I read now mostly, because I guess I'm getting old, think I'm going to try to make it to heaven. I read the Bible a lot, all the other materials, but C.S. Lewis is another one. His books on the quotes that he does, and I'm telling you, the Dr. Seuss books have more life stories that older people can go back and read and understand how life is. So those are some of the books I read. The main books that I love to read mostly are the Newbery books that get the awards for children. I love to know what those are.
Gotcha. Well, I've really appreciated this conversation. I've learned a lot about both your past, the town's past, and what I need to try to implement in my life and my children's lives from here on out. So I really appreciate it. I'm sure everyone who's been watching does too. And for you guys, this has been your host, Fallon Evans, Cold Start Media. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment on what you liked, what you didn't like, and if you'd like to see more. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
Yes, ma'am.